Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus said, "For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, 'Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, 'Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' Then the one who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, 'Master, I knew that you are a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours.' But his master replied, 'You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.'" Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Hear a parable by me. A man met with his wealth managers because he was about to go out on a 6-month world cruise on his sailboat, and he'd be unable to meet or talk with any of his business associates. And so he gathered some of his managers together, and he set before them portions of his holdings for their management. To the first advisor, he entrusted all of his Bitcoin, that newfangled electronic currency, by far his most valuable asset at around $10 million. To the next manager, he entrusted a highly diversified portfolio worth around $5 million. And to the last and youngest manager, fresh out of Harvard Business School, he entrusted his real estate holdings worth around $3 million. And while he was away, the world turned upside down. And a band of computer hackers were able to obtain the codes for about 1/3 of the world's Bitcoin. And without those security codes, the Bitcoin becomes worthless. And the manager quickly began laundering the Bitcoin through shady foreign transactions in order to cash out far below its actual value, because he was so afraid that his master's Bitcoin had been a part of that 1/3 that had been compromised. The investor charged with managing the $5 million well-diversified portfolio began fiddling with the kinds of investments that were in that portfolio. And he made the crazy decision to put a huge amount in the ever-volatile pork belly commodities market. And as the price of bacon fell due to a glut of births of pigs in eastern North Carolina and in China, he couldn't get out of that commodities market fast enough, and he lost half of that with which he had been entrusted. Finally, the young Harvard graduate, fearful of his newfound authority and responsibility, took those real estate holdings and he simply left them alone, doing as little as possible, only making a decision when his hand was forced. And in that, he was able to preserve the bulk of the value of his boss's holdings. And so the owner returns after 6 months at sea on his yacht, and he calls together a meeting of the team, not having known any of what was going on in the world while he was away. And the first manager spoke up, explaining the Bitcoin crisis and the hack and what had happened, and the owner is furious with him, firing him on the spot and chastising him for his rash behavior and not riding the situation out. And the second manager spoke up and explaining the pork belly commodity market and how he had lost so much money there. And the owner, fuming, fires him on the spot and castigates him for his recklessness. And the third owner then spoke, or the third manager spoke, and he explained that he had seen what was going on in the world, and he didn't want to risk any of the owner's real estate holdings, and so he acted very conservatively. He turned inward, and he was able to retain the value of the investments, even as the market at large dropped. And the owner, pleased with the young manager's shrewdness, rewarded him with a new position in the company and a big old steak dinner down the street at the club. Now, this is what we might expect to hear if you or I were to tell the parable we heard in the gospel today. We look suspiciously on risky behavior, never quite sure if the risk taker is crazy or brilliant. Yet in the parable that Jesus tells, it's the opposite of my parable. In Jesus' parable, the risk takers are the ones who are rewarded, and the cautious are dressed down. Risk pervades Jesus' parable. First, the owner himself risks a huge amount by trusting his servants with his money. Scholars estimate that a talent was worth about the average wages of 15 years worth of labor. And so this master in the parable is entrusting just the same, the wild sums of money with his managers as the businessmen in our parable. And next, the two servants are risky, taking chances that did something with that money that had been entrusted to them, but they lucked out and they ended up growing their purses. And instead of punishing them for having taken this risk, the owner rewards them. But the servant who conservatively buried the money to protect it, that's the one who is punished in Jesus' story. So if the kingdom of God is like this parable, as Jesus says that it is, then we can gather that we are expected to take certain kinds of risks. We are expected to step out into the unknown and to see what happens. At the same time, this expectation does not mean that we are called to be foolish. The two servants in Jesus' parable who have taken risks, have done so based on shrewd decision-making. Risks make us uneasy for good reason. Because in risk, we find ourselves either walking off the edge of a cliff to our demise as that cliff crumbles away beneath us, or we find ourselves lucky, stepping out onto firm footing that seems to be appearing under our steps as we go, like in Indiana Jones when he steps into the abyss and that rock bridge forms up underneath him as he goes. Some cliff edges should be avoided. Warning signs declaring their danger should be posted and should be heeded. Yet other cliffs hold opportunity and beckon us to come even closer and closer to the edge despite the risk involved. The life of the faithful as we seek to usher in the kingdom of God isn't one that is always or even often comfortable or easy. God's self takes risks on us, entrusting us with a host of talents for the upbuilding of God's reign and people, giving us complete freedom to use them well or not. Yet for how these gifts we will be held accountable. How we use these gifts we will be held accountable, teaches the parable. So then, do we act with our resources as if we are afraid of God and what God would think about how we are using them? Do we turn inwards and guard ourselves against every outside force that might prove challenging, thus turning our back on the world and its needs? Do we live in fear of risking something that has become too precious to us, and in our efforts to be shrewd end up fading into irrelevancy? Or do we allow ourselves to be stretched, to take chances for the sake of the kingdom and for the spread of the good news? As we seek to engage God's mission in this place and with this people here at St. Mary's, will we fall back into our cautiousness? Or will we follow down a brave new path begun already in this magnificent campus expansion? How will we use our resources to make ourselves more ready to be who God is calling us to be and to do what God is calling us to do? This year, beginning in February, with the help of an outside consultant, a group of parishioners has been involved in a process of looking into our future. And they've sought all of our input through a parish-wide meeting, through focus groups, through surveys. And now that visioning team is coming toward the end of its work, and it will be ready to present to us on December 3rd at our annual parish meeting. And I wonder, will we step out, trusting in our God, the very ground of our being, to be there and firm up the way forward, even in the face of impossibility? Or will we step back, trusting only in what we know and fearing a God who will indeed hold us accountable? Well, we'll all find out on December the 3rd. And my prayer and hope is that we will keep on living at the edge, because that's where the work is to be done. That's where the growing happens. That's where the fun is.